It all started on a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the lake was still, the birds were loud, and I thought the day would pass without incident. That's when Karen, our HOA's self-appointed enforcer, marched straight down to my dock with her clipboard tucked under her arm like a sheriff serving warrants. She didn't bother with a hello. Instead, she slapped a notice on my piling and announced loud enough for the entire cove to hear that I was in serious violation of community standards. Now, normally that sort of drama would spiral into weeks of letters, fines, and bitter HOA meetings. But not this time. Because 2 hours later, while Karen was still busy bragging about her perfectly legal Marina permit, the county revoked it right out from under her. She thought she had cornered me. What she didn't know was that she'd been standing on a trap door the whole time. My name's Tom, I'm 52, and if you ask me, I've already fought enough battles in life to have earned the right to sit quietly on my dock with a fishing pole in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. I spent 25 years in the Navy, most of it overseas, where every day was dictated by rules, routines, and the sharp bark of authority. When I retired, I promised myself one thing: I was going to live somewhere, peaceful somewhere, where the only sounds I'd hear were the waves lapping against the shore and the call of a loon in the distance. That's what brought me here to this little lakeside neighborhood tucked away just beyond the county highway. The homes aren't fancy mansions. Most of us bought here because of the water, the docks, and the small community feel. We're a mix of retirees, families with young kids, and a few working folks who commute to the city. On summer evenings, you can smell charcoal grills, hear kids laughing as they jump off docks, and see fishing boats cutting across the lake. For me, it was paradise, at least at first. The dock was always the centerpiece of my new life. I built it sturdy with my own 2 hands, sealing every plank like I was back on a ship. It became my sanctuary. In the mornings, I'd sit there watching the mist rise off the water, sipping coffee in an old Navy mug. At night, I'd cast a line under the dock lights, the kind of lights that draw base close to the surface. It was more than wood and bolts. That dock was my freedom, a personal deck where no one barked orders at me anymore. But paradise has a funny way of attracting snakes. And in our case, the biggest snake wore pastel sweaters, carried a clipboard, and went by the name Karen. Now, you've probably met a Karen or two in your lifetime. Our Karen was the archetype. Mid-50s, a permanent scowl etched into her face, the sort of woman who believes every neighborly interaction is her opportunity to prove she's in charge. She had been on the HOA board for years, not because anyone liked her, but because no one else had the stomach to deal with all the paperwork and meetings. Somewhere along the line, she crowned herself queen of the Marina. She wasn't shy about it either. Karen owned a 30-foot pontoon boat with her husband, though he mostly kept out of sight, perhaps hiding from her tirades. She bragged endlessly about their exclusive Marina permit, as though it was some golden ticket that elevated her above the rest of us mere dock owners. And of course, she never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that her dock and boat setup was 100% compliant with county rules, HOA bylaws, and even Coast Guard standards. She practically recited the regulations like bedtime stories. Meanwhile, the rest of us just wanted to enjoy the lake. Most neighbors treated the HOA as background noise, something you dealt with once a year when paying dues. But not Karen. She patrolled like a sentry. If your lawn grew half an inch too long, she'd snap a photo. If your grandkids parked their bikes near the community walkway, she'd send an email. And heaven forbid you left a kayak tied up in the wrong spot, she'd write it up as if you'd committed a federal crime. I had managed to stay off her radar for my first year. Maybe it was because I kept things tidy, maybe it was because I was new and she was sizing me up. But I could see the way she'd watch my dock eyes squinting like she was taking mental notes. I should have known it was only a matter of time. For the record, I wasn't the only one she targeted. My neighbor Steve once had his grandkids chalk on the sidewalk. Nothing offensive, just rainbows and hopscotch squares. Karen reported it as graffiti. Another time, a family down the street strung up some string lights for a backyard birthday party. Karen made them take it down mid-celebration, citing light pollution. She was relentless, and she thrived on that little burst of power she got every time she caught someone out of line. But if there's one thing military service teaches you, it's patience. You don't win every battle by charging head-on. Sometimes you sit back, watch, and wait for the right moment. At first, that's exactly how I treated Karen, like a storm cloud on the horizon. Annoying, but something you could live with. I figured as long as I kept my dock clean and my boat tied properly, she'd move on to easier prey. Still, there was something about the way she strutted around, waving that Marina permit like it was a badge of honor that grated on me. She'd stand at HOA meetings flipping through bylaws and tell people exactly what they could and couldn't do on their own property. People whispered about how exhausting she was, but nobody had the guts to challenge her. And the thing about bullies, especially the bureaucratic kind, is that they get bolder every time no one pushes back. Looking back, I realized the tension was building long before that Saturday morning when she stormed my dock. The lake might have looked calm, but under the surface trouble was swirling. Karen's obsession with control, my determination for peace, and the fragile balance of our neighborhood, it was all primed to snap. And snap it did in a way none of us expected. I was minding my own business, humming an old Navy tune, when I heard the crunch of loafers on gravel behind me. Thomas Karen called out, dragging my name like it was a word that tasted sour. I turned around, wrench in hand, to find her standing there in her pastel sweater and oversized sunglasses, clutching her ever-present clipboard. Behind her was that smug little smile she wore whenever she thought she had caught someone. Here I was screwing bolts into my dock, and she was trying to nail me for light pollution. I bit my tongue instead. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "that with all the issues in this neighborhood, you're worried about my dock lights?" Karen tilted, her head, lips curling. "Rules are rules, Thomas. If you can't follow them, perhaps lake living isn't for you." And with that, she scribbled something onto her form and clipped it down with a flourish like she'd just signed a presidential order. It didn't stop there. 2 days later, I found another notice stuffed into my mailbox, this time claiming I had improperly stored fishing equipment on the dock. Apparently, leaving a tackle box out while grabbing a sandwich from the kitchen was now a major infraction. A week after that, another letter came. My boat, she said, had been moored too long without movement. I hadn't taken it out for a few days while working on repairs, and suddenly it was a problem. The ridiculousness would have been funny if it hadn't been so infuriating. Each complaint came with the subtle threat of fines, and each one was delivered with Karen's smirk, as if she relished every chance to flex her authority. "Do you realize," she began, flipping a page on her clipboard, "that your dock lights have been on past midnight for 3 nights in a row? It's a violation of Section 4, subsection B, regarding excessive illumination." I blinked at her. "Karen, those lights are set on a timer. They go off at 11. Well, she sniffed. Someone in this community reported that they were on, and as board president, I'm obligated to file a complaint." I wanted to laugh. She didn't even bother with subtlety. She launched straight into a speech about me, how my dock was a hazard, how my negligence was disturbing the peace, how we cannot allow individuals to disregard the standards that keep our community safe and beautiful. I sat there jaw tight as people glanced at me with raised eyebrows. Some sympathetic, some amused, a few shaking their heads like they were glad it wasn't them in the hot seat. When she finished, I raised my hand. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. The spark that lit the fuse came one Tuesday morning when I was tightening a cleat on the end of my dock. It was a warm day, the kind where the sun glitters on the water like broken glass, and the air smells faintly of pine from the trees across the cove. "First off, Karen, my dock is up to code. Second, my lights are on a timer, and my fishing gear isn't trash, it's equipment. I've done nothing to harm this community." Karen's smile was razor thin. "Perhaps you don't think you've harmed the community, but perception matters. And the perception is that you're not following the rules. This board takes violations very seriously." The way she said it, calm, smug, final, lit something in me. You figure out why they've chosen that fight, and then you make damn sure they regret it. I didn't know it then, but Karen had just handed me the first piece of rope she'd eventually hang herself with. If I had thought Karen's petty complaints were just a passing storm, I was sorely mistaken. What started as a drizzle of warnings quickly turned into a full-on monsoon of harassment. It began with my lawn. Now I mow it every Saturday morning, same as I always have. My old push mower may not be the quietest thing in the world, but it gets the job done. That didn't stop Karen from snapping a photo of a single patch of grass that had grown an inch taller than the rest and slapping me with a notice of neglect. Neglect over one corner by the mailbox. Then it was parking. My daughter Sarah had come by to visit with her 2 kids. Max is a golden retriever, 12 years old, with more gray on his muzzle than I have in my beard. He spends most of his days napping on the porch, waking up only to wag his tail when the grandkids visit. But according to Karen, he was a public nuisance. Why? Because one morning when the mailman came by, Max barked twice. 2 barks, that was it. Karen claimed it was disturbing the peace. I started noticing a pattern. Every time I fixed one so-called violation, another would appear. It was like she had a spinning wheel of complaints, and every week she gave it a turn. Lawn dock lights, dog parking, round and round. At the next HOA meeting, things boiled over. Karen strutted in with her binder, the same one bulging with bylaws and highlighted passages. She waved around her stack of complaints against me as though she were presenting evidence in a high-profile trial. "Neighbors," she announced. Dramatically, "we have a serious problem. One of our members is repeatedly violating the standards that make this community safe and pleasant for everyone. This cannot continue." She didn't name me at first, but every eye in the room slid toward me. It was theater, and I was her villain. I raised my hand. "Karen, with all due respect, you've filed more complaints against me in the past month than against the rest of the neighborhood in the past year combined. Don't you think that seems a little targeted?" Her lips curled into that smug little grin. "Perhaps if you followed the rules, Thomas, you wouldn't have anything to worry about," the room murmured. Some neighbors looked uncomfortable. A few nodded along with her, but others shifted in their chairs, clearly tired of her antics. Still, nobody spoke up. That was Karen's power. She kept people too intimidated to challenge her. I sat at my kitchen table, complaint letters spread out like a battlefield map. Every page had her signature at the bottom, bold and self-righteous. Every line was another attempt to box me in, to strip away the quiet life I'd worked so hard to build. But as I stared at the pile, something shifted in me. For weeks, I'd been on the defensive, swatting away her petty attacks. Now I realized I couldn't just keep reacting. If I wanted peace, I'd have to take the fight to her. The next day, I started paying attention in ways I hadn't before. I noticed how often she mentioned her Marina permit in conversation like it was her crown jewel. She bragged about it at every HOA meeting, telling us how perfectly compliant her setup was, how she had secured special approval years ago, how no one else could touch her spot at the Marina. And yet, the way she bragged felt insecure, like someone constantly checking their reflection in a mirror. Meanwhile, the complaints kept coming. A letter accusing me of overuse of community water resources because I rinsed my dock with a hose. Another warning about noise pollution because I was fixing my outboard motor at 3 in the afternoon. Each accusation was more ridiculous than the last, but together they formed a mountain meant to bury me. Neighbors started whispering behind my back. Some avoided eye contact, afraid of being dragged into Karen's crusade. Others quietly offered sympathy. "Hang in there, Tom. She'll move on eventually," but no one dared to confront her openly. Karen, of course, reveled in the isolation. She strutted through the neighborhood like a queen, surveying her kingdom, clipboard clutched tight sunglasses flashing in the sun. Every time she passed my house, she slowed down just enough to let me know she was watching. It was psychological warfare, the suburban kind. And while it didn't rattle me the way combat zones once had, it lit a slow-burning anger in me. Because this wasn't a battlefield overseas. This was my home. I realized then that Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was trying to break me down one complaint at a time. And if I didn't do something soon, she might just succeed. The storm was building, and I could feel it. The only question was, when would lightning strike? The thing about people like Karen is that they're so busy pointing fingers they rarely stop to look at their own hands. And after weeks of being her favorite target, I decided it was time to turn the spotlight back where it belonged. It started innocently enough, me sitting at my kitchen table with a strong cup of coffee and the HOA bylaws printed out in front of me. I figured if Karen was going to keep throwing that thick rulebook at me, I might as well learn the language myself. I highlighted underlined scribbled notes in the margins. Every regulation about docks, lights, boats, pets, and even the ridiculous clause about decorative flags. That's when I stumbled across the section about marina permits. It was tucked deep in the bylaws, almost like an afterthought. According to the rules, any private permit had to be renewed every 5 years and updated whenever county ordinances changed. Failure to do so meant the permit could be revoked. Now, Karen had bragged loudly and often that her marina permit was grandfathered in and therefore untouchable. But something about that didn't sit right. I remembered her mentioning she'd secured her permit more than a decade ago, back when her kids were still in high school. That little detail scratched at me, so I decided to dig deeper. The next morning, I drove down to the county office. It wasn't exactly thrilling detective work. Just me standing in line behind a farmer paying taxes on livestock and a young couple filing for a building permit. When my turn came, I asked the clerk if I could review the records for marina permits in our neighborhood. She didn't bat an eye. "Public records," she said, and within minutes I had a thick file in my hands. I flipped through page after page until I found it: Karen's marina permit. My eyes widened. The thing was riddled with problems. Her dock extension had been approved under an old ordinance that had since been repealed. The dimensions listed didn't quite match the structure she had built. And most damning of all, there was no record of her ever renewing it after the 5-year mark. According to the county's own paperwork, Karen's perfectly legal, untouchable marina permit had technically expired years ago. I sat there in that sterile office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and let out a low chuckle. All this time, she'd been weaponizing the HOA rules against me, when in reality her own pride and joy, the thing she flaunted in every meeting, was built on shaky ground. But I didn't rush to confront her. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I decided to be patient. Just like fishing off my dock, I knew the key was waiting for the right moment to set the hook. Back home, I started building my case. I took photos of her dock measuring tape in hand, documenting every inch that exceeded the old ordinance limits. I noted the extra railing she had added, without approval, the oversized boat lift that clearly wasn't listed in the original permit. I even filmed a short video one evening panning across her dock while reading the exact regulation she was violating. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, acting as though her complaints were still getting to me. If Karen suspected I was onto her, she might try to cover her tracks. Better to let her think she was winning. The more I looked, the more glaring her mistakes became. She had always acted as if the Marina was her personal kingdom, but the truth was, she was the biggest violator of them all. And here's the irony: Karen herself had taught me exactly how to build my case. She documented my supposed violations with photos, letters, and meeting minutes, so I mirrored her tactics. I kept everything neat, labeled and dated, a proper little dossier, Karen style. One afternoon while I was out, measuring the slope of her dock from a public path, perfectly legal by the way, my neighbor Steve wandered over. He looked at the tape measure, then at me, and raised an eyebrow. "Tom," he said cautiously, "what are you up to?" I explained quietly what I had discovered. His eyes widened, and then he let out a low whistle. "You're kidding. After all the grief she's given us?" "Nope," I said. "And I've got the paperwork to prove it." Steve grinned. About time somebody knocked her off that high horse. Word spread faster than I expected. A couple of other neighbors, folks Karen had harassed in the past, approached me privately. One slipped me a photo of her boat blocking a shared launch. Another dug up an old email where she admitted skipping a required inspection because she was too busy. It was like everyone had been waiting for the chance to take her down, and suddenly I was the one holding the net. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin. I filed them carefully, double-checking every detail. By the time I was done, my binder looked just like hers, only mine told a very different story. And the whole time Karen kept strutting around the neighborhood, barking about rules and fines, blissfully unaware that her own empire was crumbling beneath her feet. I remember sitting on my dock one evening, binder on my lap, as the sun sank into the lake. The water shimmered gold, the air smelled of barbecue from a neighbor's grill, and Max snored softly beside me. I thought about how far things had escalated and how close we were to the breaking point. She wanted to play by the book. Fine. I was about to show her what happens when someone actually reads the whole book cover to cover. For weeks, I had been quietly gathering my evidence binder, filling up like a hunter's logbook. Every measurement, every ordinance, every photo of her dock angled just a bit too far out into the marina. It was all there. I was patient, careful, almost enjoying the irony that Karen's obsession with rules had taught me how to catch her breaking them. But as I tightened the noose, she seemed to sense something shifting. Maybe she noticed that my responses to her complaints weren't as sharp anymore. Maybe she saw me smiling too much on my .com as a man who already knew the ending of the story. Either way, Karen didn't like it, and like any cornered animal, she lashed out. It began with another notice in my mailbox, this time not about lights or dogs or grass. No, this one accused me of harboring a hazardous structure. That's HOA speak for claiming my dock itself was unsafe, rotten, liable to collapse. The kicker, she claimed it was dangerous to children. That one stung. My grandkids loved the dock. They'd dangle their little feet over the edge while I baited hooks, laughing when the fish nibbled. Karen knew exactly what she was doing, painting me as some reckless old man endangering kids. I stormed into the HOA office that week, complaint in hand. "You're telling me my dock's unsafe?" I asked the board, my voice echoing against the bland beige walls. Karen sat at the end of the table, smug as ever. "That's correct," she said sweetly. "We've had reports. Reports from who?" I shot back. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "Concerned neighbors. I'm not at liberty to say." I wanted to slam my fist down, but I held back. Instead, I locked eyes with her. For just a second, I thought I saw something flicker behind her mask of confidence, something nervous. But it was gone as quickly as it came. 2 days later, she upped the ante. I received a formal letter, not just an HOA notice, but a legal-sounding document drafted by her friend, an attorney from town. It warned that if I didn't bring my dock up to compliance within 30 days, the HOA would pursue legal action to remove it entirely. Remove my dock. The very heart of my home, the one thing that had gotten me through restless nights and long days. I'll admit it. That night I sat on my porch with Max at my feet and felt a knot in my stomach. I'd seen my share of fights, but this was different. This wasn't some enemy overseas. This was my neighbor, a woman who lived 2 doors down, and she wanted to take away the piece of peace I had worked for. For a brief moment, I almost wondered if it was worth it. Maybe it'd be easier to just give in, fix whatever she demanded, avoid the headache. But then I remembered the file I had sitting inside, my binder of truth, and I smiled. Because while Karen was busy drafting threats, I had something better: facts. Cold, hard, undeniable facts. Still, her attacks weren't finished. She started spreading rumors, subtle ones whispered just loud enough for me to overhear. At the Marina, I caught her telling a group of neighbors that my dock had unstable pilings and might pull other structures down with it. At the community picnic, she leaned over to a family and muttered that my fishing lines were a hazard for kids swimming nearby. Each lie was designed to isolate me, to turn the neighborhood against me. But here's the thing about lies: they're brittle, and when you push against them with the weight of truth, they snap. The more she bragged, the more careless she became. At one gathering by the Marina, wineglass in hand, she puffed up and declared to half a dozen neighbors, "My permit is flawless, untouchable. Unlike some people here, I follow the rules." She emphasized the word "I" so hard you'd think she was carving it in stone. I stood nearby listening, fighting the urge to laugh. Because by then I already had the county's file tucked safely at home, stamped and signed, showing that her untouchable permit was, in fact, paper thin. Karen's confidence only grew. She started walking past my house more often, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her nose like a badge of office. Each time she slowed just long enough to glance at my dock, smirk, and scribble something down. It was a performance, one designed to let me know she was in control. But what she didn't realize was that the script had already flipped. The spotlight she thought she was shining on me was about to turn around, blinding her in its glare. The last straw came one evening when she approached me directly. I was sitting at the edge of my dock, Max at my side, casting a line into the fading light. She appeared suddenly, shoes clicking against the wood, and stood over me with that clipboard. "Thomas," she said in a tone dripping with condescension, "I think it's time you faced reality. This dock of yours is on borrowed time. You can fight all you want, but in the end the board will side with me. They always do." I reeled in my line, slowly met her gaze, and smiled. Not the defeated smile she expected. No, this was the kind of smile that said, "You have no idea what's coming." "Karen," I said calmly, "you might be right about one thing. This dock is on borrowed time, but it's not mine you should be worried about." Her face flickered with confusion, but only for a second. She sniffed, scribbled something on her form, and walked away. That was the moment I knew it was time. She'd made her final move. Now it was my turn. When Karen walked away from my dock that evening, smug as ever, I knew the time for patience was over. I had spent weeks building my case, like a careful craftsman laying bricks. Now it was time to mortar them together into something solid, something that would hit harder than any of her clipboard complaints ever could. The first step was simple: verify. I didn't want to waltz into this fight with half-baked assumptions. So the next morning, I called up my neighbor Bill, a retired lawyer who used to practice property law in the county. Bill was the kind of guy who wore suspenders even on his porch and still read the paper cover to cover every morning. If anyone knew how to turn my binder of evidence into a legal sledgehammer, it was him. He welcomed me into his study, where the walls were lined with law books that hadn't been touched in years but still gave the place an air of authority. I laid out my findings across his desk: the expired Marina permit, the mismatched measurements, the county ordinance changes she'd ignored. Bill adjusted his glasses and flipped through the papers, slowly humming now and then. Finally, he looked up, and for the first time in weeks, I saw confirmation in someone else's eyes. "Tom," he said, tapping the file with his finger, "this isn't just sloppy paperwork. This is a full-blown violation. If the county sees this, her permit's toast." I leaned back in my chair, grinning. "So it's not just me imagining it. Not even close," Bill replied. "She's been skating by on technicalities. The county tightened regulations 5 years ago. She should have filed for a renewal and adjusted her dock. She didn't. Legally, she's out of bounds." Those words were music to my ears. The second step was to gather allies. Karen had bullied enough people that I knew I wouldn't be short on volunteers. I started quietly reaching out over backyard fences, on early morning walks, even in the grocery store aisle. Steve, the neighbor whose grandkids' chalk drawings she'd once labeled graffiti, nearly jumped at the chance. "I'll testify if you need me," he said. "I've still got the email where she made me scrub the sidewalk with a bucket of water." The Johnsons, who'd been forced to take down their string lights mid-birthday party, provided photos and time-stamped texts. "We never forgot what she did," Mrs. Johnson muttered. One by one, neighbors came forward, each carrying their own little piece of ammunition. On their own, these stories were small, almost petty, But together, they painted a clear picture. Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was weaponizing them. The third step was strategy. I didn't want this to be some messy shouting match where it was her word against mine. No, this had to be airtight, undeniable. So I put my Navy discipline to use. I organized everything into sections: county records, showing her expired permit, photographic evidence, her illegal dock extension, oversized boat lift, and unapproved railing, witness accounts, neighbors with first-hand experiences of her harassment, ordinance changes, clear documentation of new rules she had ignored. By the time I finished, my binder was heavier than her infamous clipboard. And unlike hers, mine wasn't stuffed with half-truths and exaggerations. Mine was fact. Still, I knew I couldn't rely only on paperwork. Bureaucracies can drag their feet unless you nudge them hard enough. That's where the fourth step came in, making it official. I scheduled an appointment with the county zoning office. This time I wasn't just browsing records. I was filing a complaint. The clerk, a young guy with tired eyes, flipped through my binder as I explained. I could see his eyebrows climbing higher with each page. "Wow," he muttered. "You've done more work on this than most inspectors." "Just trying to be thorough," I said, hiding a grin. He nodded, stamped the forms, and said, "We'll send an inspector out this week. If what you're saying checks out, and it looks like it will, that permits history." Walking out of that office, I felt 10 years younger. For the first time since this war with Karen began, I wasn't just playing defense. I was on the attack. The fifth step was psychological. I didn't want to show my hand too early. So while the county machinery began to turn, I acted as if nothing had changed. When Karen walked past my house, I gave her a friendly wave. When she sent another petty warning about my improperly stored garden hose, I tacked it to my fridge like a souvenir. The calmer I acted, the more agitated she became. But behind that calm was a storm. My allies and I exchanged quiet nods, small smiles, knowing we were all in on the same secret. Karen thought she had the neighborhood under her thumb. She had no idea the ground was about to vanish beneath her. One evening, I gathered a few of the neighbors in my backyard for a quiet barbecue. The smell of grilled burgers filled the air, kids chased fireflies, and laughter drifted into the night. It felt like the neighborhood had before Karen's reign of terror, easy, warm, connected. At one point, Steve raised his beer and said, "Here's to peace on the lake," and to finally taking down the self-proclaimed queen of the Marina. We all clinked glasses, grinning like conspirators. As the night wound down, I sat on my dock under the stars, binder by my side, Max snoring softly. The lake was calm, but beneath the surface, change was coming. Karen had declared war, certain she'd win with her endless complaints and empty threats. What she didn't realize was that I'd been preparing my counterattack with the patience of a fisherman and the precision of a sailor. Her next complaint would be her last. The night before the next HOA meeting, I didn't sleep much. Not out of nerves, more out of anticipation. It felt like the night before, deployment gear, packed plan, rehearsed, waiting for the mission to begin. Only this time my gear was a fat binder of county documents, photos, and witness statements, and my battlefield was the bland conference room in the community clubhouse. When I walked in, the room already buzzed with low chatter. Folding chairs scraped against the floor as neighbors shuffled in. Karen was there at the front, clipboard in hand, pastel sweater draped over her shoulders like armor. She looked confident, almost smug, as if she already had my head mounted on her wall. The meeting started as usual with her banging that little gavel like she was presiding over the Supreme Court. "First order of business," she said, her eyes sweeping the room, "is yet another violation committed by Thomas." She said my name with relish, as if unveiling the villain of the night's performance. She launched into a speech about how my dock was unsafe, how it endangered the children of the community, how it was a constant disruption. She even pulled out a glossy photo she'd taken of my fishing gear sitting on the dock, zoomed in like evidence from a crime scene. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some rolled their eyes. Others sighed, clearly tired of hearing the same old script. But Karen wasn't deterred. She puffed herself up, savoring the attention. When she finally paused, I stood. "If I may respond," I said calmly. Karen smirked. "By all means, Thomas. But I should warn you, the board has already reviewed your infractions." I carried my binder to the front table and set it down with a heavy thud. Papers rattled, a sound that made a few heads turn. I flipped it open slowly, deliberately enjoying the way Karen's smile faltered just slightly. "You've accused me of a lot of things," I began. "Dock lights, fishing gear, barking dogs. You filed more complaints against me than against anyone else in this neighborhood combined. And every time I've listened, I've checked my lights, secured my tackle box, even kept my old golden retriever inside, more than he deserves." But while you've been busy pointing your finger at me, I tapped the binder. I've been doing some pointing of my own. A murmur rippled through the room. Karen's straightened eyes narrowing. What exactly are you implying? I pulled out the first document and held it up. This is a copy of your Marina permit issued 12 years ago. It was supposed to be renewed every 5 years. It never was. Gasps from the crowd. Karen's face went pale, then flushed red. That's not true, she snapped. My permit is grandfathered in. Actually, I said, flipping to the next section, county ordinances changed 5 years ago. Your dock extension exceeds the legal dimensions. Your boat lift, not on the original permit. And the railing you added, completely unapproved. I spread the photos across the table, shots of her oversized dock tape measure, in view, each one labeled with the corresponding ordinance violation. Neighbors leaned forward, whispering. Karen tried to laugh it off. This is absurd. You don't know what you're talking about. But I wasn't finished. Here's the best part. 2 days ago, the county inspector came out at my request and reviewed your setup. As of yesterday afternoon, your permit was officially revoked. I pulled out the stamped notice from the county office and slid it across the table toward her. For a moment, the room was silent. You could hear the hum of the old air conditioner, the squeak of a chair shifting. Then the whispers started. Some neighbors chuckled. Others clapped quietly. A few outright laughed. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on the dock. She stammered, This is a misunderstanding. It's a clerical error. I'll appeal. But the damage was done. Her empire, built on smug authority and petty complaints, crumbled right there under the fluorescent lights of the clubhouse. Steve, sitting in the back, raised his voice. So let me get this straight. She's been fining us, lecturing us, writing us up for every little thing, while all along she's been the one breaking the rules. The room erupted. Laughter, murmurs, a few muttered figures. Karen's face burned crimson. I leaned back, arms crossed, and delivered the final blow. Karen, you wanted to play by the book. Well, the book just caught up with you. Turns out the dock we should have been worried about wasn't mine, it was yours. Neighbors chuckled again, some even applauded outright. Karen grabbed her clipboard, her precious badge of authority, and stormed out, muttering under her breath. The gavel she'd so loved to bang sat abandoned on the table, silent as the room filled with the sound of relief. That night, walking back to my house, I felt lighter than I had in months. The stars glittered over the lake, Max trotted happily at my side, and the air smelled like victory. Karen had finally been dethroned. The morning after the showdown felt different. The air over the lake seemed lighter somehow. The kind of crisp clarity that only comes after a long storm has finally blown itself out. I poured myself a cup of coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and just listened. No rustle of Karen's loafers on the gravel, no pointed coughs outside my window, no folded notices in the mailbox. Just birds, water, and peace. Word spread quickly, as it always does in small communities. By noon, half the neighborhood knew that Karen's Marina permit had been revoked. Her prized dock extension, the one she'd bragged about in every HOA meeting, was now officially illegal. Within days, she received her own letter from the county, instructing her to remove the extra structure and cease using the boat lift until further notice. I won't lie, watching her scramble was satisfying. For years she had strutted around like she was untouchable, and now she was just another homeowner, scrambling to comply with the same rules she'd weaponized against us. The sight of her out there with a contractor, arms waving wildly as she argued over removal costs, was a kind of justice money can't buy. Neighbors who had once stayed silent started coming out of the woodwork. Steve strolled over with a grin and handed me a 6-pack of beer. To the man who slayed the dragon, he said, The Johnsons invited me over for a backyard dinner, their string lights twinkling proudly overhead, no longer afraid of Karen's clipboard. Families let their kids draw on the sidewalks again, laughter echoing where once there had been only the sound of Karen's scolding. The best part, the HOA meetings suddenly grew normal. Instead of Karen monopolizing every conversation people actually discussed, community projects, fixing the playground fence, organizing a neighborhood picnic. For the first time since I moved here, it felt like a real community, not a fiefdom under a petty queen. As for me, I finally got my dock back, not that I'd ever lost it, but now it felt free again. I could sit there with Max dozing at my feet, lying in the water, without the nagging worry of what fresh complaint might arrive tomorrow. The dock lights glowed gently at night, just as I'd set them, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was under surveillance. Of course, Karen didn't disappear overnight. She still lived 2 doors down, still wore her pastel sweaters, still clutched that clipboard as if it gave her power. But now, whenever she passed my house, the smugness was gone. Her steps were quicker, her gaze averted. She knew she no longer had the neighborhood under her thumb. And in a way, that was the sweetest victory, not her humiliation, not the revoked permit, but the restoration of balance. We were no longer living under Karen's rules. We were living as neighbors again. One evening, weeks after the whole ordeal, I was sitting on my dock as the sun dipped low and painted the water orange. Steve joined me, beer in hand. We sat quietly for a while, listening to the crickets start their song. You know, he said, finally, you didn't just beat Karen. You reminded all of us we don't have to put up with bullies. I nodded. She thought she had power because we let her have it. But rules cut both ways. And if someone's going to enforce them on everyone else, they better be ready to follow them themselves. Steve chuckled. Poetic justice. As the lake settled into twilight, I felt a deep satisfaction. Not gloating, not smugness, just a quiet sense that justice had been served. Karen had tried to take my sanctuary, and in the end, she lost hers instead. Life went on. The seasons turned. My dock aged another year, weathered but sturdy. The neighborhood grew friendlier, warmer. Karen remained in her house, but her reign was over. And me, I had peace again. The kind of peace that comes not from avoiding conflict, but from standing firm when it really matters. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting the loudest, it's letting the truth speak for itself. If there's one thing this whole ordeal taught me, it's that bullies don't always come with clenched fists or cruel insults. Sometimes they come with clipboards, bylaws, and smug little smiles. But no matter the form, the principle is the same: people only have as much power over you as you allow them to. Karen tried to drown me in complaints, to bury me under the weight of rules she didn't even follow herself. But instead of lashing out or giving up, I chose patience, preparation, and truth. And when the moment was right, the truth was all it took to topple her. So if you're watching this, remember, stand your ground. Don't let anyone bully you out of your peace, your home, or your dignity. The rules that others twist against you might just be the same rules that protect you. What about you? Have you ever had to face a Karen in your life? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because trust me, you won't want to miss the next HOA showdown.